Hi guys! I like to save all of my more interesting scraps and offcuts from different projects because when they pile up enough, they make really interesting magnetic bottle opener boards. I wish I had a better name for it than that, but that's what it is. So I've got a bucket full of scraps here, and I figure it's time to put a couple of bottle openers together. Usually it's a matter of just taking the scraps and trying to put together things that are interesting. Most of these scraps are, you know, knotted up pieces from a cutting board that didn't work, or just the last, where'd that one go? Just the last little trim from a chessboard. Just miscellaneous stuff that was too good to throw away but not good enough to keep in the project. So generally speaking, I shoot for about 4 by 7 for these boards. Any smaller than that and they don't work very well. Too much bigger than that and they look awkward. So we're just going to mix and match these until we have a batch that looks interesting, and yeah, then start making some bottle opener boards. Once I have all of my pieces picked out and paired up, it's just a matter of gluing them and clamping them together. Depending on how many I am making at the time, these things tend to run through my clamp supply pretty quickly. It is helpful that these are small, because this way all of my clamps become potentially useful. When working with scraps, the glue-ups tend to come out fairly uneven, so it is helpful to get one side flat at the joiner. In this case I'm working with end grain, so it's important to take very little bites and to go slowly. Then, with the new flat side against the fence, I can use the bandsaw to roughly cut the opposite side to flat as well. This saves lots of planer and drum sander time. In this case, the scrap pieces were thick enough that I could cut this one down the middle and end up with 2 workable boards. Next, I'll run the boards through the drum sander to get them smooth and flat. I use the drum sander when I'm doing end grain like this because it's safer. Otherwise I just use the thickness planer because it is faster. Next, I use the table saw to rip them to their final width. On this piece, I had what was essentially an end grain veneer left over from the last round of bottle opener boards. I glued it to a sheet of plywood thinking that it might make for an interesting piece. Then, using my small crosscut sled, I square off the ends of the boards and cut them to their final length. On this piece, you can see the different lengths of scraps that I used. Rather than just cutting it square, I decided to make a round cut at the bandsaw to try to utilize as much of the material as possible. Then, using the belt sander, I smooth out the arch. Now it's time to start working on the pockets in the back for the magnets. I like to use a 1/2 inch wide bar-style magnet. It has a very strong holding power, and the elongated nature of it casts a wider magnetic net with which to catch the bottle caps when they fall. I start out by centering my 1/2 inch router bit on the workpiece, then adjusting the depth. There's a bit of a balancing act here. I need it close enough to the front of the board so that the magnet will grab the bottle caps, but I also want it to hold itself securely to a metal surface when finished. This little detail dictates the thickness of the overall board more than anything else. After marking out the hole locations for the opener hardware, I drill pilot holes to prevent splitting the wood. In my experimenting with these, I found that there is no such thing as too strong of a magnet. The large bar magnets that I use have a holding strength of 33 pounds, and on some of my bigger boards with heavier opener hardware, they still manage to slowly slide down towards the floor. That's why, depending on the general heft of each board, I will supplement the big magnet for 1 or 2 smaller ones at the top of the board. I will set the magnet and the board on a flat surface to mark the depth, then flip the board over and set the depth stop on the drill press before drilling holes. With all of the magnet pockets ready to go, I mix up a batch of epoxy and glue them all into place. When drilling out the holes in the back, keep in mind the thickness of a thin layer of epoxy. If you don't allow for some extra depth in your holes, the magnets could end up sitting proud of the surface and your board will not lay flat when finished. In that center board, you can see that I pulled the magnet back out and removed a little bit of epoxy because I didn't drill the hole quite deep enough. Next comes everyone's favorite step, sanding. I started by doing the edges and rounding over the corners with the belt sander. Keep in mind that with the magnets glued into the board, this thing is held down firmly to any metallic surface. Then I sand the front face with my palm sander and round over the top edges. Don't worry about the back other than to just clean up any epoxy spills. As long as it is flat, it is good enough, because we will completely cover it up with the next step. Using a sheet of self-adhesive cork, I stick all of the boards down and then start to cut out the shapes. The adhesive on this is so sticky that it actually sticks to the blade of my box cutter and starts to tear. So I always use a brand new blade, and I found that rubbing some paste wax on the blade a few times during the process helps to keep that from happening. I feel like the cork is a nice touch. It gives the backside a cleaner, more professional look, and it also helps protect the surface that it will be resting against. Some refrigerators have a finish that is prone to scratching, and the cork provides a softer barrier between the finish and the board. Just keep in mind that this is one more thing that the magnets have to work through. I will use the belt sander to fine-tune the edges of the cork and blend it into the board. Now it's time for some finish. Tung oil is one of my favorites, but you could use just about anything here. Sometimes I use lacquer for a more durable finish, but it isn't entirely necessary. Next, I can put all the bottle opener hardware on, and these things are all finished up. There's really only one thing left to do now. That's to test them out and make sure that they work. Thanks for watching. Cheers.